Good day, Western Standard viewers, and welcome to this special edition of Hannaford, a weekly politics show. My guest today is Michelle Rempel Garner. Great to see you, Michelle.
Great to be on your show and see you too, Nigel.
Oh, it's been too long. We should have done this a long time ago.
Absolutely.
Michelle Rempel Garner is the Conservative MP for Calgary Nose Hill. She is no stranger to the headlines, and earlier this week, all in a good cause, by the way, but earlier this week, she was kicked out of the House of Commons for basically calling Edmonton MP Randy Boissonnault a fraud. That was on Tuesday. On Wednesday, Ms. Rempel resumed her seat. On the same day, Mr. Baso resigned from cabinet to work on clearing his name from the allegations of fraud. Michelle, this looks like the tip of an iceberg. What's really going on here?
Well, for anybody who's been following the Randy Boissonnault saga, it really is like a made-for-TV movie. Writers for Netflix could not have come up with a crazier plot. So, I mean, Mr. Boissonnault, I guess he had a company, and at one point he decided that he wasn't going to be with the company, but there's some question on when that happened and what his business, if he was still affiliated with the business at different points of time. That company received a lot of government contracts. It is now being, I believe, investigated for allegations of certain types of misconduct. There's a whole bunch of other incredibly weird things that have happened with that particular issue. But then, this has been going on for months. He should have been ejected from cabinet a long time ago. But then this week, news broke that he had falsely claimed Indigenous heritage, and that this company that he either formally owned, we're not sure, it had also claimed Indigenous ownership. And at some point in time, it did receive government contracts. So there was a lot of questions about that, what that all meant. But obviously that received a lot of outrage, particularly from First Nations leaders. That there was a very prominent Cree lawyer who was quoted as saying that identity fraud is fraud. And using that statement, I stood in the House of Commons and made a statement asking for his resignation. And for that, I was ejected from the House of Commons, and Mr. Boissonnault was allowed to remain in cabinet. Now, to your point, he did resign the next day, but it shows a broader problem, Nigel. Like my question is why was that man allowed to sit in cabinet for this long? It sort of shows a rot in the Liberal government. There are other cabinet ministers that should probably be given the boot. But overall, it's time for an election. I mean, if I'm being ejected from the House of Commons for speaking truth, and Randy Boissonnault gets to sit out the day with a car and driver, something's very wrong with this country. So we have to fight back.
Well, I think we do, and I think our interests in this are in good hands with yourself and some of your colleagues. But let's just talk about this matter of the Liberal tolerance for ambiguity. Back in 2015, the party published a poster showing 9 Indigenous members who were Liberals. One of them was Mr. Boissonnault. Now, I noticed when that was renewed a few years later, his name was not on there, which suggests to me that somebody had said, well, this is questionable. Let's take him off. But it was not questionable enough for them to remove him from cabinet, or in fact to stop them from giving him an even better job. So you and I both remember what the life was like under Stephen Harper. I don't think this would have flown under Stephen Harper, but it does fly under Mr. Trudeau. Is there a different kind of culture in the Liberal Party that we should be aware of?
Well, I think a lot of Canadians are living with the Liberal culture right now, right? Let's talk specifically about this issue, the false claim of Indigenous heritage and ancestry. That's a really serious issue in the context of achieving First Nations reconciliation. This is a monumental task. It's sensitive. Former cabinet minister Jody Wilson-Raybould weighed in on this yesterday. And it's something that any government of any political stripe will have to address. But to your point about culture, the way that the Liberals have addressed this issue really has been a lot of fluff over substance. The example I've used is, the classic example is Justin Trudeau vocally supporting a national holiday to solemnize reconciliation, and then on its first observance, taking a surfing holiday. Randy Boissonnault being allowed to sit in cabinet with false claims of Indigenous heritage, while having this other cloud of scandal about this former, or we don't know what company that he was affiliated with, swirl around him. It is this culture of arrogance. And again, that results in really bad public policy. It's why you see that culture of arrogance and not understanding what the needs of Canadians are and prioritizing in internal promotion. It results in the housing crisis, in a broken immigration system, in people not being able to afford groceries. And that's why these guys need to go. They have lost the moral authority to govern a long time ago. And, it's why the Conservatives, my party, we've been putting forward a very simple message about fixing these issues. And it's why that's resonating with Canadians, is because Canadians know they deserve better than what's being served. That, like you said, that really negative, rotten culture of the Liberal government that's being served to them right now.
Now, Michelle, a moment ago, you mentioned food prices, people being able to afford groceries. Two headlines this week, both involving Mr. Trudeau, seem to me to be connected. I wonder if you feel the same. The first headline was a comment that he made in Brazil to a civil society organization. I think they're called Global Citizen. At any rate, basically he made a very specific comment about the primacy of fighting global change over meeting the grocery bills. He actually said words to the effect of, it's very tempting to say, well, let's deal with global warming later, because right now we can't afford groceries, and that's got to be, feeding my children has to be first. And then he, having mentioned that, he said, but that's not what we need to be doing. We have to stay on task with global warming. Seemed a frighteningly insensitive comment from somebody who probably doesn't have to worry too much about where the groceries are coming from or who's going to pay for them. The second related is this morning's announcement of GST cuts on a range of products for 2 months, a GST holiday, they call it. Food, children's clothing, toys, all the Christmas things, alcohol as well, as a matter of fact. GST holiday, do you connect these two statements? Or
I guess a few things.
Go ahead.
It will come as no surprise to your listeners when I say that Justin Trudeau has failed on on all policy fronts. So let's talk about, commitment to the environment and about food affordability. Okay. So Justin Trudeau put in place a very detrimental piece of policy to the Canadian public, which is the consumer carbon tax. If that worked the way that he said it was going to work almost 10 years ago, we'd be living in a land of milk and honey, where milk and honey was a lot less expensive than it is right now. And we would have seen a material reduction in Canada's greenhouse gas emissions. And on all of those fronts, he's a failure. He has not accomplished any of those goals. It's the opposite, right? In fact, one of the only times in Canadian history we've actually seen a major reduction in greenhouse gas emissions with economic growth was under when? Former Prime Minister Stephen Harper. Today, what we're seeing is emissions growth, while Canadians are paying far more for everything, because the consumer carbon tax compounds as it goes along a supply chain, right? We know that for a fact. So, when you're talking about these other announcements, the Conservatives under our leader, Pierre Poilievre, have had one consistent message this entire time, which is we need to axe the carbon tax. When we axe the carbon tax, we will see permanent reductions in all of these prices across the board. And, this is why we have been so vehemently opposed to what the Liberals are going to do anyways, which is increase the carbon tax next year. So, they can talk about whatever they want, but at the end of the day, they still have this ineffective, extremely detrimental tax, the consumer carbon tax, on increasing the cost of everything, while planning to increase that next year. So, I just don't think Canadians buy this. I honestly think that they know that Justin Trudeau is full of it, that he's not delivering on anything, except for making their life more expensive. Just to close, I'll say, I think what Justin Trudeau is looking for right now is he's got a very restless caucus. They haven't really showed any public courage, but I know that there's been a lot of media stories talking about what they're doing behind closed doors. I think he's looking for ways to buy time until Christmas for his own political fortune. But there's no question in my mind that he's only worried about his own political fortunes. He's not worried about making life permanently more affordable for Canadians.
I'm sure you're correct about that. With these GST cuts, do you sense that there might be some kind of a deal with the NDP going on here? Some arrangement to just keep the NDP from finally pulling the pin on that government?
I don't think that there's any deal that needs to be made. The NDP will prop up the Liberal government no matter what happens until their leader becomes eligible for his pension, to vest his pension in February 2025. And even then, I think they'll just continue to support the Liberal government. I watch them every day in the House of Commons. They are completely, like, you'll notice, Nigel, like even on the issue we were talking about before, Randy Boissonneau, they weren't raising that issue in the House. Like they weren't the ones that were actively pushing and prosecuting Randy Boissonneau's questionable issues over the last several months. No, they are allowing this Liberal government, all of their cabinet ministers that are under, clouds of scandal, to continue, because I'm sure that the leader's pension has something to do with that. And because these are not people who are in it for Canadians. They are in it for themselves, for their political salary, and they don't want to go to an election because they are worried about losing their seats. And it's as simple as that. And it's so gross to watch every day.
So how would you characterize these GST cuts? And is it just a stunt?
Again, you have to look at what the Trudeau government's overall agenda is, and that is to tax Canadians and raise the price of goods on everything. For me, all they needed to do was axe the consumer carbon tax. That would make life permanently more affordable for Canadians. And the fact that they won't do that, and they're trying to, deflect from the fact that they are going to increase that tax, and which is going to increase the cost of everything. I know Canadians know better. And, I'm going to rely on the wisdom of Canadians on that, and continue to push the government, as all of my Conservative colleagues are, as well as our leader, to axe the carbon tax.
Do you think Mr. Trudeau actually believes in his heart in the carbon tax as a solution to what he also, I think, believes in global warming?
I don't make a habit of trying to get into Justin Trudeau's head. I feel like that's a very polluted place to be. I would flip the question a little bit, and I would say I don't think Justin Trudeau is trying to understand, or has the capacity to understand, what an average Canadian is going through. I have a couple close friends of mine who live in my riding. They're not particularly political. They probably make a combined income of under $80,000 a year, and they just lost long story short, they can't stay in the home that they're living in right now, and they can't find a place to live. And this is in Calgary. And when they came to me and talked, they said, what should we do? And for me as a legislator to not have it's like, here's what we're doing, here's how we're trying to fight the government to make life more affordable. I don't think Justin Trudeau has the plight of people who are in those types of situations. And there are millions of Canadians in that situation right now in your heart. So, for me, it's less about trying to get in Justin Trudeau's head and trying to take the very real concerns of millions of Canadians that are related to housing affordability, food affordability, into the House of Commons and speak truth to power. What Canadians need is a long-term cut to the cost of living. And, we have a simple plan for that. It's 4 points, but axing the carbon tax and fixing the budget. Justin Trudeau, our party leaders talks about putting a cap on spending and ensuring that $1 in, if the government wants to spend $1, it has to be found somewhere else. We know the Liberal government has just wasted money on the We Charity scandal. I could go through billions of dollars of scandal. That's where my headspace has to be. But I can tell you one thing, Nigel, that is not where Justin Trudeau's headspace is, for sure.
Let me ask you this. We don't have an awful lot of time left, but in October, it was discovered that the so-called Green Slush Fund had some questionable expenditures. The Liberal government has not provided the information that the House of Commons has asked for, and as a consequence, business has effectively come to a halt. How long can that situation go on before you have to have an election? Can this go on till October?
Well, briefly with the time that we have left, and I'm looking forward to getting back to Calgary this afternoon. I'll say this, Parliament ordered the production of these documents. In our democratic system, Parliament is supreme in these matters. The government is obligated to hand these documents over to Parliament. The fact that the government is thumbing its nose at Parliament, again, this isn't the first time they've done this. It really shows their disrespect for democratic institutions. And, if we're supposed, you see the geopolitical instability that we're dealing with, Nigel, around the world. If Canada is supposed to be a shining light of democracy, then the Liberal government can't just thumb its nose at Parliament because it feels like it and it wants to avoid future scandals. So this is really up to the Liberals to end this by handing the documents over. I can't tell you, again, I don't want to get into the heads of Liberals, but for our part, the Conservative Party, we're holding the line on this because it's something that's worth fighting for. Our democratic institutions are worth fighting for. It's what our constituents expect us to do, and we will certainly continue to do that, to hold the Liberals' feet to the fire and use every tool that we have in the book as parliamentarians.
Look, we are just about out of time, and I know you want to get to the airport. So how about I just ask you this? With Parliament deadlocked over the Green Slush Fund, is it possible for this government even to pass legislation or introduce a budget?
Well, I mean, what the government has to do, the Liberal government, is comply with an order of Parliament to hand over documents related to a major scandal. This is an order that Parliament made. It's something that they have to comply with. They can't just thumb their nose at Parliament, which they've done in the past. So this is up to the government. If the government wants to put forward legislation and debate legislation, then they need to comply with an order of Parliament. And that is something that Conservatives feel is a hill to die on. You can't, in a free and democratic country, Nigel, the government can't just be allowed to dismiss Parliament, because when they dismiss, me, they're dismissing nearly 120,000 people that I represent. And then you multiply that across Parliament, and you see what kind of an impact that has on Canadian democracy. So I certainly hope that they could end it today. They could hand over those documents today and we could get on with business. But I really think that the Canadian public should be putting pressure on the Liberal government to do the right thing and to support our democratic institutions. But, while hope springs eternal, this is Justin Trudeau that we're talking about. So I think we need an election. I can't even some days watching these guys.
Michelle Rempel Garner, the Member of Parliament for Calgary Nose Hill. Michelle, thank you very much for being with us today and for
having me.
Safe journey back to Calgary as always. And we'll be watching for further headlines from you as the days go by.
Thank you so much, Nigel.